So I've spoken, so within the Labour Party, as I said, my focus is around energy and climate change, but I talk to all my colleagues, and so some of my colleagues just work in foreign affairs. This is how I got some of the information, and I learned that we've been strongly raising this with the government. So as I said, we're in opposition. So in terms of what we can actually practically do, the best that we can do is speak very loudly on this issue and all the issues around the Arab Spring to the government to say what are they doing when they're meeting representatives of the Bahraini government or the Syrian government, and when they make visits to the region, to hold them to account, to say what you're doing and how you're treating your citizens and your doctors just isn't acceptable. So we're against what's happened. We think it's a human rights abuse, and we've raised it we have an opportunity to ask the Foreign Secretary in Parliament about what's going on, and this issue's been raised by both Labour backbenchers and the front bench. Just not this specific issue, but the issue around Bahrain and also about Syria has been raised during Foreign Office questions, and asking the Foreign Secretary, William Hague, what he's going to do, either when he meets bilaterally with those countries or when he goes to other places like Europe, or when he goes to the UN. And actually there's a big discussion at the moment about whether we need to do more about what's happening in Syria, and whether we perhaps need to have some sort of UN resolution to take some action so Assad doesn't, or the regime doesn't continue to kill its own citizens. Does that help? I should say though, from the question that you asked me, it's really good that, what did you do with the amnesty campaign? Did you write a letter to anyone?
To the Bahraini government.
You wrote a letter to the Bahraini government. You can also, something else that you can do, is that you can write to your Member of Parliament, which most likely probably is me, but you can find out by going to a website, and you can write to your Member of Parliament and ask them to write to the Bahraini ambassador, who's based in England, and I can write a letter to the ambassador on your behalf. So it's good that you've written direct to the government, but you can also write to your MP, and then I can write another letter on your behalf. So anytime you want to do that, you can find out who your MP is by putting your postcode into a website called theyworkforyou.com, because I work for whoever elects me to represent them. And if I am your MP, then you can write to me, or it might be one of the other 4 MPs, and then I can write to the ambassador as well. It just helps to add the voice that they know that, as well as citizens across the UK, that also elected representatives are concerned about this issue too. Excellent. I've now grouped together lots of questions on homelessness. I've got questions 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, and 10. We can go through them individually, or we can say them all and we can group together a conversation about homelessness. Huh?
If you were in charge of the government, what
So wait, stop. I don't know what you said, first of all. No, pause. Like, do you want to group them together? Or you And do you want to say
I'm really looking forward to questions.
What's your name?
If you were in charge of the government, what would you do to help the homeless in our city?
Okay. Let's do question.
Group them together.
Group together, yeah. 5.
Is anybody else would like to read out their question?
Or do you want me to read them out?
I think they can say I asked a question as opposed to questions were addressed. You see there.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Question 5. Just to share it with the group. Say your name.
Zayn.
Hi, Zane.
Yeah. Do you think homelessness is increasing?
Right. Question 6.
Do you believe that homeless people are feeding?
Right. Question 7.
Do you think the current government is doing enough to lower homelessness, and what would Labour do differently?
Okay. Question 8. I had that as question 7, so that's mine on my sheet. But
How do you see the issue of homelessness in the UK compared to other countries?
Okay. I've got 2 more homelessness questions, but I had a 7 as 8. Anyone else got a homeless question?
Yeah. How do you see the issue of homelessness in the UK compared to other countries?
Just had that one. But you have it again. The other 2, anyone else got a homeless question? The other 2 that I had on my list, and they're kind of similar, was do you think your party is doing enough to help the homeless? And what are your personal views on the problem of homelessness in our city? I'm going to just look at my sheet for 1 second only so I can give you some exact figures, because I don't want to get this wrong, particularly around homelessness. Homelessness is anyone that doesn't have a home. It's it's one of the vital things that we need in life is shelter. And if you don't have a home, that's a terrible thing to happen. I have, as an MP, I have a surgery every Friday afternoon. So after this, people can make an appointment on a Friday afternoon from around 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock. I meet people that want to come and talk to me. And I've noticed in the last couple of months the increase in people that are very worried that they're going to be made homeless, they're about to be evicted, and the situation is sadly and terribly only going to get worse. And the reason why it's going to get worse is the government is changing, and again, it's not my government, it's the Tory Labour government. They're changing the rules, and as of April of this year, it's going to be very difficult because they're cutting the amount they're allowing people to claim for housing benefit. And I should say, people don't know in this room, housing benefit isn't just for people out of work, it's as much for people in work that get low pay to help them to pay for their accommodation. They're changing the rules that anyone aged under 35 has to share accommodation. So they might be in a single room, small bedsit or 1 bedroom accommodation now, and the government's insisting that if you're under 35 you've got to move. If you're in that circumstance you've got to share. They're saying that people, if they've got spare bedrooms in their social housing, that they've got to downsize. And the problem is that we don't have enough homes in the city. We know that we've got at least 14,000, if not 20,000 people here in Liverpool that are looking for somewhere to live, that want to live in social housing and can't, or they might be living in crowded housing. One of the examples is I met a family with a son with cerebral palsy, and they're in a house which is very, very small, but 2 up, 2 down. And the mother has to carry her son, big 8-year-old, up and down the stairs, and it's very, very difficult. And they're desperate to move, but there just isn't the properties. And if people don't move, then vacancies don't present themselves. So I'm very worried about the changes that are coming, particularly for the under 35s and for older people who might have lost a partner or whose children might have moved out and be forced to move. We don't have the right accommodation. And the other issue is that government cut the money for a scheme called Housing Market Renewal. So have you seen Edge Lane where we've got flattened land? Has anyone seen it? We used to have houses and now it's all flattened land. Has anyone seen it?
Yeah.
Has anyone seen it? Places where we've got boarded up housing, in bits of Picton. So those areas were expected to be demolished, and some of them have been flattened, waiting for new homes, or they're expected to be flattened to build the new homes. The government took the money away. The government took away £120 million that we were expecting here in Liverpool to build new homes. So this all adds to the challenge of what's going to happen to people in terms of where they live now or where they want to live in the future. If we don't have the new properties or the spaces for them to move into, and the government's cutting the money, it's going to be very, very difficult. So I'm very worried the fact that we've got already too many people that are homeless, that are going from couch to couch, are living in our kind of homeless type accommodation, but I think it's going to get even worse going forward. And we objected, and when I say we, someone asked me, what's the Labour Party doing? So we voted against many of the things that the government's going to introduce from April because we don't think they're fair, and we think that they penalise the most vulnerable people in our society and our community. We don't think it's right. And so they're also reducing the amount available for rent. And in some places, we're not going to see a reduction in rent in the private renting sector from landlords. So I had another constituent who got in touch with me just on Christmas Eve to say, I'm expecting to be made homeless because I'm going to see a cut in my housing benefit, and the landlord wants to put the rent up by £100 and I don't have that £100 extra. And that's just one example before the cut. So we're very worried about it. We voted against it. We voted against the new rules when the government put them forward. We will continue to do that. I've been working very closely with some of the local registered social landlords, so big organisations. Anyone heard of Riverside? Or Liverpool Mutual Homes? So I work very closely with them to make those representations to government to say this is going to be the impact of your changes, and this is the people that it's going to affect, and this is why it's so bad. And I will continue to do everything. Now, the government's also shifting the responsibility to local authorities, but not giving them any money. So giving councils responsibility. If someone's made homeless, it's now the local council's responsibility to look after them, but they're not giving them any extra money to do so. That's also going to make the problem or the challenge more difficult if councils don't have the resources or funds to help people when they're made homeless. We saw under the Labour government, we were in power from 1997 to 2010, there was a 70% reduction in homelessness. It wasn't 100%, but it was 70% in the right direction. But it's by 2010-11, it had risen again by 10.3%. That's after 1 year of the new government. So we're very worried about what's going to happen going forward, and we will continue to oppose what they're suggesting. There's a bill, has anyone heard about a new bill, a new law the government's introducing, the localism bill? It's a big thing that the government thinks so great. Well, we don't think it's so great because it's going to weaken the rights of homeless people. And it means that they can, the local authorities, if they don't have the money, can put homeless people in the private rented sector. And we think that they should be looked after by registered social landlords who are more responsible and often fulfil their obligations and look after people better than in the private rented sector. So we're very unhappy that the localism bill allows any council across the country, be it here in Liverpool or elsewhere, to put homeless people into the private rented sector where they're less looked after. We learned that around 35,000 people lost their homes around Christmas this year. That's 630 people a day, one every 2 minutes. They will be receiving a letter threatening the loss of their home. That's a really sad indictment in the 21st century, that all those families and individuals are experiencing that kind of thing. And it will often, when people, if they are made homeless, it takes them more time to get back on their feet. They'll experience an illness, or it's a very, very stressful situation, and just that experience can make it very difficult for people to get back into work. And one of the organisations that does a lot of things in this area, an organisation called St Mungo's, they found that 3 out of their 5 outreach workers, and they're people that work on the streets, stated that rough sleeping had increased by 71% across the country. So it's very difficult. We just find it very difficult. The other issue is about people having access to support and advice to help them if they are made homeless. And again, here in Liverpool, we've seen a reduction in the amount of money available to Citizens Advice Bureau. Citizens Advice Bureau help people, Merseyside Welfare Rights, another organisation that help people when they're in very, very difficult situations, but they've seen all their funding cut. So as an MP, I've seen the number of people come to me increase massively. So I now deal with about 600 people every month. And that's only risen in the last year alone, and that's before some of the bigger cuts and the bigger changes happen. So I'm very worried about it, and we'll just continue to speak out against it. And you could do the same too by writing to Grant Shapps, who is the housing minister, or you could write to David Cameron, the Prime Minister, and tell him how worried you are about this. But it is a big issue, and it's only, sadly, I think, going to get worse. But we will continue to campaign against it. Does that answer your question? It's not a happy answer. I'm sorry, it's not more happy. We've got one more question on the sheet. You have to say your name.
No. Do you see the move towards private universities and higher tuition fees as limiting young people's choices in higher education?
Did everyone hear that question? Does everyone have the question in front of them? I'm going to repeat it. Do you see the move towards private universities and higher tuition fees as limiting young people's choices in higher education? I don't think it's just the increase in fees. Who here is being affected or will be affected or knows people affected by the cut to education maintenance?